And good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are dialing in from. Welcome to the second webinar that we are doing for the SCP. So welcome. And before we kick off, what I would like to do is acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and land, as well as cyberspace. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We do continue to be incredibly grateful to work with a number of Indigenous organisations and to have First Nations people working with us in this endeavour of building an amazing cybersecurity industry. Today we are bringing to you a breakdown of the 2020 Cybersecurity Sector Competitiveness Plan. What a jam-packed document it is, and if you joined us just ahead of time you would have seen some slides that were showing you the crunchy data that is available within this SCP that tells a story of just how much our industry has grown over the past 4 years in particular, but also the last 12 months. We are really proud to be launching this year's SCP update together with, for the second time, the CysoLens Benchmark 2020. And we encourage you to go to both the CysoLens website as well as the AustCyber website to be able to download the Benchmark 2020, which provides all of the data that you need to be able to have a complementary picture of not just what's happening around the growth of the industry, but also what CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers and their equivalents are doing around the country in terms of the buyer side of the equation. So this gives you the industry side of the equation, and we also, with the companion document in the Benchmark 2020, are giving you data that can show what the buyer side of the equation looks like in a year that, of course, has had more buzzwords than we've ever known before. The year that has been 2020, we couldn't have ever imagined that we would arrive in December, today being the 1st of December in Australia, where we've had a look back across a 12-month period that feels like one of the longest years that we've ever experienced. It gives me enormous pleasure to be able to do this webinar today with our node managers from across the country. We have a number of them with us here in Canberra today, which is where we're doing this filming from, but also having online joining with us is Paula Oliver from South Australia. We wish that Paula could be with us, but of course, travel is a little bit tricky from South Australia at the moment, so we're really glad that Paula could be joining us through the interwebs, which is really important. So before we kick off and get into a conversation with our node managers, which is really exciting to have all of them here with us, as well as online. What I wanted to do is just break down a little bit of the SCP to set the scene. So where are we at? 1 December 2020, how far have we come in the last 12 months since the last update was released just before Christmas last year? We've come a long way. Of course, cybersecurity has been one of the topics that has been front of mind for the country. So not just for decision makers in previous years, but this year it has been front of mind for the nation, as we went into a lockdown that meant that rapid transition of working from home and school from home meant that we became incredibly dependent on digital infrastructure in a way that we never had been before. In that time, of course, malicious actors were having a lot of fun. And unfortunately, we became an increasing target of that malicious activity in Australia. Of course, we always have been a target of malicious activity, but gosh, it increased over the past 10 months. And of course, you can visit the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's website to find more data around that as well. What we can focus on, though, is how much that response to malicious activity has had impact on the growth of the cybersecurity industry. And for the first time, the SCP is providing data around our industry's contribution to the bottom line of the economy. So it's not just about GDP. We have had that data for a little while now, but for the first time ever, we can demonstrate how much value add is being contributed to the bottom line of our nation by the cybersecurity industry directly. And that is at $2.3 billion over the past 12 months. And we are estimating that that will dramatically increase over the next 5 to 10 years. This is really significant for our industry to understand just how much value we are creating from an economic standpoint. But within the same 12-month period, within Australia alone, $5.6 billion was spent on products and services of cybersecurity. That is a mix of domestic and internationally provided products and services. But also the report breaks down for the first time what that picture looks like state by state, and that's what we're getting into today. It's really exciting to be able to provide the state of the cybers as part of the SCP, to really throw behind the sort of top line data of that 5.6 billion, the 2.3 billion, and I'm going to throw another one in here, the 26,500 direct workers that make up our industry now, and we are expecting that to continue to grow year on year in numbers that are just astounding, that really do point to, of course, that ongoing underlying challenge that we have as an industry to be able to have the talent to continue to grow and support the defence of the nation. So to be able to look at that state-by-state picture and see how that relates to the growth strategies of each state and territory government, but how that collectively then contributes to the overall double-sided aspect that is cybersecurity. That by doing cybersecurity, we are defending the homes and the businesses of this country, as well as, of course, creating jobs, revenue, and really importantly, as part of COVID recovery, profit. And we're going to get into some of this today because, of course, a lot of the discussions in communities around jobs and growth, that's turned into jobs and revenue as part of COVID recovery. It's really important that we're generating profit. That's retained value that comes into the economy as a result of profits being made in the endeavour of whatever it is. And in this case, cybersecurity has an advantage that is the envy of the rest of the economy at this juncture. We are, of course, the true horizontal. Everything now, no matter what it is at the individual level, right through to the largest organisations and fabric of our very society and economy, is, of course, cybersecurity. And I would add to that and say that it is also safety and privacy. And so that three-piece equation of security, safety and privacy in a cyber-physical world, we've realised now, thanks to the pandemic, that this really is a truly horizontal endeavour that we are delivering in cybersecurity. It has upsides, it has downsides and everything in between, but it is a true mission that we are engaging in as an industry and helping the rest of the economy and community understand not just what the downsides are, but truly what the opportunities are if we can embed trust in our cyber-physical world. So without further ado, we're going to get into a conversation with our node managers. So I'm going to do that from left to right, from my side of left to right. And so first and foremost, Mina Zaki, welcome, node manager from New South Wales. And then we go to Ian Martinus, node manager from WA, all the way from Perth. Thanks for joining us today, Ian. And Lou Partridge, of course, our new node manager in Queensland. And sitting next to her, we have Mark Hamilton, our new node manager in Sunshine Coast, which is fantastic. Thanks for leaving the sun and coming down to be with us today, Mark. And then Casey, all the way from Tasmania as well, coming across the ditch, I think for probably the first time since lockdown. It's
Absolutely.
Great to have you here as Node Manager of Tasmania. And then our national lead for the national network of nodes is Linda Cavanagh, and representing the ACT today. And today, colleagues, we also have online Paula Oliver, as I mentioned, from South Australia. Hi to you too, Paula. And I'll be representing for the nation today on behalf of Victoria and the Northern Territory. We will absolutely have full national coverage today. And so I'll be the acting node manager for the Northern Territory and Victoria today, so that we can make sure that we cover off on all aspects. So team, we're going to dive in and I'll make sure that we give Paula a little bit of time to warm up to kind of the conversation as well, so that she can jump in from the digital. But look at all of you, an amazingly gorgeous bunch of people. And of course, this is actually the first time that as a national network, and we're still recruiting for our we're still recruiting for our Townsville node manager. So we'll have, maybe I should cover Townsville today, but you guys should cover Townsville today. This is the first time you've all been together since forever, because we actually recruited a number of you during lockdown. So Louise and Mark, you were recruited during lockdown. So
Certainly were.
What does that feel like for you guys to come together and be with your counterparts and being here at AustCyber Central for the first time?
Honestly, it's fantastic. We've been wanting Queensland to have AustCyber representation for a long time, so I was over the moon when you announced it earlier in the year. I think we're about 2 months into the role, so lots to learn, but the excitement, the passion, the innovation that's happening in Queensland is just so exciting.
Yeah, and I feel that there are certain things that you miss not having that face-to-face contact, and it's just great to catch up with all the other node managers, swap ideas, and get a leapfrog into what we're coming up with.
And you know, we do get asked all the time at AustCyber, you know, so how do you have two regional nodes in Maroochydore, covering the Sunshine Coast, Sunny Coast, I think you call it in Queensland, and also Townsville. Mark, I'm going to ask you the first question actually, because, you know, why Maroochydore? I know why, and I just want to sort of say to the audience that we are doing Townsville and Sunshine Coast in partnership with the Townsville City Council and the Sunshine Coast City Council. I'm intensely proud that we've been able to work with councils in Australia to be able to bring nodes into the network. And absolutely for everyone else, of course, we do have a whole range of councils now across the country knocking on the door saying, can we have a node too, please? So why Maroochydore? What's special about Maroochydore, Mark?
Well, Maroochydore is special just because it is. As a point of difference, council went through and decided to invest in an international broadband cable network. So we are now internationally connected through a link down to Sydney, but also to Guam, Japan, Singapore and LA. So as a point of difference, the region is now set up with a great foundation to support a lot of complementary industries. And cybersecurity is definitely one of those industries. So council is very much behind establishing the industry on the coast and further developing. And we've got a great history in that as well. We've got some great companies that have come out of the Sunshine Coast exporting, and we're looking at those next brilliant minds that are coming up, investing our time and getting them to the point where we can continue that export market.
And thanks for touching on the export side of things, and that's a really important part of what the national network is all about. And, you know, I'd have to say for councils out there, you know, get in touch, absolutely. Reach out to Linda. You know, there's a really important cue there around why Sunny Coast has come in. And that's because they'd have from the get-go, from a long time ago, to Mark's point, they recognise that cybersecurity is that enabler and that you can't have trust in the community around building industry and delivering new forms of employment if you don't have cybersecurity built in. And so they reached out and asked for our help to do that. And of course, we're absolutely so excited to be in partnership with Sunny Coast City Council and of course also Townsville and Queensland Government more broadly. So Lou, tell us a little bit about that networked effect that you're going to be delivering for all of Queensland in conjunction with, of course, Mark, and when we get the node manager in place in Townsville.
Yeah, look, Queensland Government is really keen for us to have a consolidated approach across the state. There's going to be unique opportunities on the Sunshine Coast and up in Townsville, but we really want to look across the board at key areas like skills, jobs, innovation, so growing. We've got quite a mature cyber startup landscape, and then leverage the advanced Queensland strategy that's been in place and really grow that ecosystem, but bring in our academia who are doing amazing things with some of their new programs in cybersecurity masters. So just really bring it all together into one place and have one view. At the moment, Queensland Government is doing incredible things. There's not a lot of visibility onto that, so we really want to tie all of our programs together and get as many people leveraging those programs as possible.
And of course, there was an election in Queensland recently,
Yes.
and so I think that being able to then do a bit of a segue to, you know, sort of some of the other jurisdictions that have had elections during this crazy year. It's great to see that there's going to be continuity happen as a result of all of this in terms of cybersecurity. But of course, we know that, I'm going to come to you now, Linda, you know, the nature of cybersecurity means that we need to have a bipartisan approach, and the ACT is an area that's demonstrating that in spades. Tell us a little bit about the picture for the ACT over the past 12 months as we start to dive in to analysing the data within the SCP. If you can talk to us a bit about what happened across the election period here in the ACT and how it's been leveraged to be able to start to propel things forward from a innovation and cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So, yep, as you mentioned, we had an election here, I think in October, and again we saw continuity in government there. And the ACT Labor and both Canberra Liberals were very much at the front of utilising cybersecurity and how it can actually leverage all of the diversification of the economy that they've been able to do over the last 2-3 years. And one of the key fundamentals that came out of the election was actually the bringing together of a cyber cluster, or as we in AustCyber call it, a super cluster, is bringing together a diverse range of sectors together in the ACT and being able to use that and promote Canberra as the cybersecurity epicentre. Yes, I have said that. As the forefront leader in cybersecurity, and how to actually do that through from the ideation phase through research and development, but also to touch on export as well. So having our government actually looking at this from a very progressive way, through a very innovative way in the ACT, I think we will definitely see some changes over the next 12 to 24 months.
And so we can't have a conversation about the political landscape around cybersecurity without crossing to South Australia. Of course, because in South Australia, we have a very strong friend of AustCyber in the Premier of South Australia, Steve Marshall, and also the entire fabric of the government within South Australia working very, very hard to take that, sort of spot on the top of the podium to be, the cyber state of the country. I love that we can use the Federation to keep upping the ante here across the country on cyber innovation. So Paula, talk to us a little bit about what's going on in that landscape in South Australia where you've got Lot 14, there's so much activity going on there, and just that leadership that's being demonstrated from the political perspective, because of course there is a bipartisan approach there as well, as much as Steve is the voice of cyber.
Thanks, Michelle. It's really happening in South Australia. We have absolute leadership, as you just described, with Stephen Marshall's government really shining the light on cybersecurity as that enabler for all of the other sectors that we really want to invest and propel forward for our state. The Lot 14 initiative has been very pivotal, not only for our sector, but for all others. To really be able to lift it all up. So Lot 14, the innovation neighbourhood where the AustCyber SA node is home to, which I'm very grateful for, but also home to things like the Australian Institute for Machine Learning and the National Space Agency and Stone and Chalk. And it really is that community of support that's been built that's making a massive difference in South Australia. It's really accelerating a lot of the connectivity amongst those sectors. And helping us understand what's going on between and amongst us as well. But really having everybody, in and amongst that high-tech and emerging sector and startups, it's created a very organic way for us all to connect. It's really accelerated the business-to-business connections, and it's taking SA's let's collaborate attitude that we've always had for a while to the next level. And it really has set us apart, especially now with A3C, the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre, being there as a member and a tenant. It's those corridor conversations that have been happening that have made it so easy to get those ideas flowing and new projects underway. And we couldn't have done that, quite honestly, without the dedication of what AustCyber is driving across the country, but also through that leadership that Stephen Marshall's government's demonstrating very clearly.
He does have cyber word bingo going on, often within the Parliament in South Australia, which I love. So we will continue the caravan of the political story now. So coming to WA, what I would like to ask you, Ian, is, of course, we've worked really, really closely with WA government to make sure that there's that kind of cluster kind of focus around how you can deliver cybersecurity as that enabler to all parts of industry. Tell us a little bit about what's been going on in Joondalup over the past couple of months.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that, a big shout out to Paula in South Australia. I often use South Australia as kind of a benchmark to shame some people in Western Australia. So even during Cyber Week at our State of Cyber kind of big gathering in Perth, pointed to A3C, and I guess the co-opetition and kind of the way that some parts of the wheel are greased in a really positive way. So it kind of helps us leverage, as you say, our aggregation of effort as well. So in Joondalup, Simon and I are fortunate enough to sit in kind of we're the cyber outcasts because we're not pure computer science and sitting and teaching and learning. But the nice thing is we sit with the information warfare and defence folks, we sit with the CRC, with Helgi, we sit with Tony Marcetto, so Securing Digital Futures, and we have this, and obviously West Australian Police, so Tech Crime Services, so all of the cyber experts in the state, about 60 of them now, growing to about 80, sit on the floor above us. So in terms of the glue, as you're suggesting, for proximity, WA, even though it's outer suburbs, it kind of speaks to the regionality of the country, where there's a regional development council, or WA has kind of 9 super regions. So while it's a big state, if you have the brand of AustCyber in Canberra that we rely on heavily to hub and spoke our initiatives and our efforts, so we're not just faking it to make it or making it up, then Joondalup becomes one of the spokes that people actually, understand where we're from. So again, if you're kind of just an orphan running around in the street and saying cyber, 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 folks don't believe you. So the nice thing, as to your question, and again, talking about A3C and other kind of great parts of Australia, the competition, it's fierce amongst all of us. WA clearly the proudest and the best, and the bow and arrow to Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia. I can go on and on about how great we are. They all know how great we are. And there's no competition with New South Wales or others. So it's the great thing when an aggregation of effort, there's a supply side of students at Edith Cowan University. So actually the largest in Australia, so 1,600 students on campus, and off campus these days. Undergraduate with 400 in masters, with doctoral, postdoctoral fellows. And I guess that's where the deep cyber comes into it. If you're talking about, as you said, partner, build, export, then if an innovation can be protected, popped out, so I guess lab to market, that's the type of things that the CRC does, but also the postdoctoral and the research fellows. So Simon and I get to see that kind of daily, so we're really, really lucky. The problem is, as you've said in other webinars and open forums, is that when you don't take the opportunity to commercialise it out of a hub, somebody else will. And somebody will beat you to market, somebody else will flip your product and blueprint it in a trade show, and you're done. So that's the thing that we see for the export opportunity, and WA, even in the latest SCP, only really exports a third of our product and service, pure product and service. We need to do better with that. We need to take the lead from Central and some great states around this federation. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun. Daily interactions around the water cooler type thing. Yeah, we just love it. Too much fun in WA. So everybody, come to WA.
I love this. And of course, there's 2 states that I haven't covered yet of people in the room. Casey, Tasmania.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Tasmania, of course, is not considered by many people on the mainland using Tasmanian language. Those who know
The Big Island.
the Big Island, the Big Island. We have a tendency to forget, honestly, that Tasmania is there, not at AustCyber to be clear, but the rest of the country can forget that, of course, there's some amazing things happening down in Tassie, and of course the effect that we have through AustCyber down there is that we're not just in one location there, even though we call it one node. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the conversation about, Queensland really leading the way in terms of these regional hubs. We had that train, 2.5 years ago in Tasmania. So the hub itself is based in Launceston, the northern city in Tasmania, and we also have a presence in Hobart. So our delivery partner is Enterprise, which is a startup incubator, and a lot of the work that we're doing in Tasmania is really about that early stage ecosystem building. So we're talking to students that are, even at year 12 level or in university. We're talking to them about the opportunities for them as a pathway to entrepreneurship rather than necessarily a pathway to industry. And we're also working with a lot of cybersecurity professionals that are already there in the state about what the opportunities are to actually start building an ecosystem of cyber startups in Tasmania, the opportunities for export. And I think one of the really exciting things to come out of the update to the SCP was that the story around the country is that something that needs to happen to really uplift the sector is doing that really early stage startup support. So from the beginning of setting up the nodes in Tasmania, that's what we've really focused on. Like I said, with our delivery partner, we're looking at the ideation phase. We ran a great program called the Big Cyber Ideas during Cyber Week this year, where we had students and professionals kind of pitching ideas, learning the basics of startup businesses, and we're also working through a formal incubator program as well with a cyber stream for early stage businesses. So it's all really focused on building that community and providing the framework, the foundation there for those early stage entrepreneurs.
Which is, of course, fantastic because there's actually a lot of strategic assets sitting down in Tassie, which...
Don't give it all away.
Well, that's it, yeah. So, it's like the worst kept secret, isn't it? That, the rest of the world knows that we've got these huge strategic assets sitting down there, but mainland kind of doesn't know. So having cybersecurity front and centre and quite visible is really important there, of course, isn't it?
Absolutely. And in the state budget that was handed down just about 5 or 6 weeks ago now, there's a big pocket of money that the state government has committed to further digital transformation of government systems, government processes. And so we're right there in the room making sure that that's a cyber first approach. So making sure that everything that they do as they're going through all of those old archaic systems that still exist, and some of them are decades old, that they're really considering what the cybersecurity implications of that are, because as we all know, that's not something that you just bolt on at the end. It's something that needs to be considered right from the beginning of any digital transformation.
Absolutely. Could not have even asked you to say that any better, Casey. And as we pass across to Mina, just want to kind of reflect for everyone. Again, as I said yesterday when we did the launch seminar, there's... Can we cast our minds back prior to, COVID and the national lockdown that started in March? We actually officially launched, did the big hurrah for Tasmania in the last week of January this year, which feels like it was about 10 years ago.
If only 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. So to see, pardon me, how far you guys have come in that time is just incredible. So kudos to you. And it's a great segue across to the New South Wales environment where, of course, legacy systems is something that is very, very front of mind for another great friend of AustCyber, which is Minister Dominello. We've been doing some really incredibly deep work in New South Wales to leverage the largest economy, Mina, that sits in Australia. It's undeniable. Unfortunately, friends, we cannot ignore the fact that New South Wales is the largest economy and that we have been doing a lot of the standards and procurement work in New South Wales. So colleagues out there in the interwebs, watch out for a cabinet decision that's coming to a media release near you in mid-December around what's happening on ICT procurement in the New South Wales government. And you would have seen that AustCyber has been heavily involved in that, but also the work of harmonising cybersecurity standards. And we're very close to launching a digital tool that will be able to help the entire country around standards harmonisation for industries everywhere across the economy for cybersecurity, which is incredibly exciting and is feeding up into the Better Regulation Task Force being run by the Department of Home Affairs at the federal level. And so, Mina, we're going to leverage that segue to ask you the first question that dives into the SCP. Tell us a little bit about what the picture looks like that's talked about in the SCP for New South Wales being the largest economy and the largest grouping of cyber companies in the country.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for saving the best till last. As you would have noticed today in the Australian Cybersecurity magazine, they very correctly quoted the SCP and said that New South Wales is leading the way in the cybersecurity sector, and they're absolutely right.
You should see the faces here.
These guys can try all they like, but, just admit it.
Never.
80% is a huge number.
It is.
And of course, it just goes to the fact that it's an environment, it's an economy that supports that. Now, with that said, 10,000 plus jobs in New South Wales are cybersecurity related jobs. And with COVID, the focus right around the country is going to be increasing that number as much as possible. So watch us rise even more. As the node, we're going to be supporting all of the cybers in our ecosystem, and we're looking forward to supporting the startups. And there are quite a few startups that have come out of COVID And of course, with our partnership with Stone and Chalk, we'll be doing everything we can to support the startups and increase those jobs in New South Wales, because that is where we need to keep our focus. Now, with skills, we've been working very closely with all of the universities, not just one, all of the universities in New South Wales. So that's, University of Western Sydney, New South Wales University, Sydney Macquarie, etc. And so with a skill pipeline, we've got that pipeline. Right now, our focus and the New South Wales government's focus is definitely going to be on bringing that skill number and putting them into jobs. And so connecting industry with skills, and that's where we'll be focusing. So watch this space and watch that 10,000 number just right up.
So the cooperation, I love that phrase that Ian used earlier. Of course, the story here is to make sure that we are all working as a networked effect, to be able to use the best of breed that comes out of each of the strengths of the states and territories to rise the whole of the nation. And that's something that obviously all of us have in our hearts here at AustCyber, is making sure that absolutely we can take the leadership role that each of the states and territories do have in the different strengths that they possess in the makeup of their communities, their businesses, their academic communities, and also governments plural, to be able to make sure that Australia really is punching above its weight when it comes to cybersecurity, particularly when we go to export these capabilities to the world. So I'm now going to ask that we pass the mic around and answer a similar kind of question as what I asked Mina. And so coming to you, Louise, with Queensland at that overarching picture of Queensland, the SCP paints a pretty positive picture for Queensland as well. Tell us a bit about that.
So I don't think anything in the SCP was surprising. I think it just reinforced to us that innovation and that passion is there. 60% of our cybers are exporting, which is amazing to hear. I think there's been so many answers where it's been very true for Queensland as well. So we have a very strong startup culture, and Queensland government is running incredible programs to really help them grow. They see, like Casey mentioned, that cyber is really that enabler. They've seen a really rapid increase during COVID of digitisation, people perhaps rushing to market and maybe not thinking about security enough. And so they're really keen for us to help that secure by design mentality. So as you're building, factor security into everything you're doing. The other key area that they're focused on is the SCP calls out some of the key industries. So we're working in our 2 months of operation really closely with the defence hubs, Defence Jobs Queensland, the Advanced Manufacturing Group, and looking at their supply chains and how we can help strengthen the cyber awareness, the cyber skills, the hygiene, some of the basic hygienes of their small to medium enterprises in the supply chain. So Department of Small Business Training, so they've all changed names recently, but there's a real passion for that education of the small businesses, because they're our growth and they're our big economic drivers. So where we can spend time, and there's some programs that we're looking to pilot regionally first to really educate that space and help that growth and ensure that they're secure from the start. What else? Skills, I think, is Mina mentioned that industry connection with our students who are studying cyber. So we're looking at doing things like a digital apprenticeship or a digital traineeship that's really going to take a graduate who comes out at this level up to the base level that we know they need to be at. So, we've got, as part of my industry advisory group, I have Rob Champion, who's the Queensland Government CISO. He's fantastic at helping us guide, and along with other department heads who cover security, really telling us what's that baseline that we need to get to for industry to then hire people who are coming out of university. We're also really focused on reskilling where we can. So people who have that natural propensity for cyber and may be working in a completely different industry that we can reskill and train, and they bring that, experience and maybe a bit more maturity into the industry as well. So lots happening in 2 months. But it's funny, from day dot, I've just been inundated with meetings and requests, and it's blown our minds how much passion and excitement, but I also think how much the AustCyber brand, the reputation that it has, even in Queensland, when we haven't had a presence up until now, that brand has been able to push, have such a positive, I guess, connotation behind it just from, you know, the work that it's been doing in the other regions up until now.
Awesome. And so I'm going to pass to Paula shortly, but as acting node manager for Victoria, I'm going to ask myself the question. You know, one of the things about you know, the stats within the SCP for Victoria, it would not surprise most people, but perhaps surprise others, that the average age of a business that is in the game of cybersecurity within Victoria is 7.5 years. I was surprised by that. I actually thought that, you know, as much as you know, the sort of, I guess, groundwork that was laid by Philip Dalidakis when he was Minister for Innovation in Victoria up until the last Victorian election, we've seen a huge proliferation of the number of startups in cybersecurity in Victoria. But equally, we've got some of the most mature companies within the nation that have been doing cybersecurity for 20 plus years are actually headquartered out of Victoria. So this is where we start to see that average come into it. But you know, with that average age of being 7.5 years, I actually thought it would have been probably a little bit less than that. So passing to you, Paula, what does that kind of landscape look like for South Australia now that you've kind of really got some acceleration going on with that cluster effect?
Thanks, Michelle. So South Australia, the picture it paints is really quite accurate in terms of what industry was already aware of, I think, here in South Australia. But what it highlighted was that SA is probably ahead of its game in terms of export. It was quite surprising to see that 67% of our cybersecurity companies are already exporting, which is absolutely fantastic. They're already hitting those global markets, and they're able to provide those lessons learned back to the ecosystem, which I think is absolutely ultra valuable. With companies like our Airlock Digital, one of AustCyber's project fund winners, a global recognised leader in application whitelisting, they've successfully entered markets such as the US and so on. And similarly with Prophecy International, one of our more mature companies, which in fact has been operating for some 28 years now, and is a stock exchange company. They're already in multiple markets internationally with their Snare suite of security and compliance product range. So what it really highlighted was that maturity in export, which I think was a little bit surprising, that not many people, I think, widely knew about from South Australia. I think another thing that it really highlighted was our mature age, you know, an average maturity age of 11 years. It highlights that our state's really been developing and growing exceedingly well in cybersecurity. It's definitely the export around that as well is definitely an area which SA looks to strengthen in the future as well, with initiatives such as defence teaming centres, Export Hub, for example, that will be very focused on cyber, but also advanced manufacturing. So I think it's really brought to the surface some things that were already known, but showcased some of our real strengths as well.
And isn't that interesting, you know, that 11 years, I think absolutely there's kind of that, I guess, outlier with Prophecy, which is fantastic, but there's also CQR that's been around for a number of years now, a CyberCX company. There's some really interesting things going on there that other jurisdictions can look to be able to take some hints on how you scale companies. Speaking of scaling companies, Linda, in the ACT's trends always buck the national average when it comes to these kind of very focused industries like cybersecurity. Tell us about the stats that we've seen out of this State of the Cybers report for the ACT.
Well, I have to say that a lot of the stats haven't been of surprise to me, having been the Canberra node manager and being embedded with the industry here. So we're sitting at about average of 7 years, and in the 2 years in being with AustCyber, I've seen significant growth across a lot of our cybers here, with Pen 10, with CyberMerc, with Fifth Domain in regards to the size, the products that they're providing, but also the employees as well, which are obviously contributing both to the ACT but nationally as well. also in relation to the exporting data that states that I think we're sitting at just under 30%. I think one of the lowest in the country, but again, that's no surprise when you actually have a look at where our focus has been here in the ACT, and a lot of that has been for government, for defence, and a lot of that is within the national security space. You know, when we're talking about threat intelligent platforms by CyberMerc, or we're talking about AutoCrypt, which is about mobility for government. So having that focus on defence, having that focus on national security, you can't necessarily be, scaling too quickly to ensure that you've got that quality, because, we are about quality, not quantity here. I am looking at New South Wales here. And the other element as well is the innovation space, which I mentioned before. You know, we have such a great community here of cybers, but we also have such a great innovation environment as well through the Canberra Innovation Network, which provide a sector agnostic approach to the innovation space that we have here. And they have just jumped on board when it comes to cybersecurity and being able to, as you've said before, utilising cybersecurity as the true horizontal. So ACT really shows the effects of how they utilise cybersecurity across the territory.
Indeed, and, you know, to kind of make a point that I've been making a little bit across the time, you know, we've talked about how we can sometimes forget that Tasmania is a part of the country. We can also forget that in Canberra there are two layers of government, that, you know, the ACT government, of course, who we partner with to deliver the ACT node. There's huge amounts of activity happening within the territory from an industry growth perspective there, and that, you know, there is actually a bit of an air gap between what the ACT government's doing and what the federal government's doing, but it kind of ends up being joined in the middle by AustCyber, doesn't it?
Exactly right, and that's, I suppose, you know, one of the benefits with AustCyber is, working with our state and territory partners, but having that backing and that national perspective from the federal government. And although, yes, we are, you know, Canberra is always referred to as, you know, the seat of government. You know, it's always about the Canberra politicians. We obviously have our own, identity and our own image, and, you know, we actually punch well above our weight considering the size of our jurisdiction, and on a per capita basis, you know, we are seeing significant amount of cyber innovation through here, through the ACT. So, I think, you know, there's so much more that we're going to be able to provide. You know, as I said, I've seen growth over the last 12 months. It's going to continue on for the next 18 months.
Indeed, and good things too. So, Casey, we're going to come to a little bit of a kind of awkward thing now. You know, as the acting Northern Territory Node Manager, I'll help you out here. Between us, we've got, let's say, a bit of a bear in the room. So there you go. What did I make a reference to there? There's a bit of not an elephant, but a bit of a bear in the room in the sector competitiveness plan. You know, there's not a state-based picture for Tasmania or the Northern Territory. Tell us a little bit about why we didn't see a state-by-state kind of picture for Tasmania this time around.
Yeah, look, I can only assume it's because all of the Tasmanian cybersecurity businesses were out actually getting the job done instead of responding to surveys here and there. No, look, I think, it's absolutely something that needs to be discussed, needs to be brought up. We certainly do have a cybersecurity industry in Tasmania, but as the SCP made it very clear, it is a very small one. Like, it's a very early stage. I think something that provides us a lot of promise is that you have a look at some of the shining beacons around the country in terms of where that opportunity has been shown by the SCP. Adelaide, where's Paula? Over there somewhere. I think the number was 9. There's 9 cybersecurity companies headquartered out of the state that responded or that were captured in the data. So I think, while the number at the moment in Tasmania in that report is 0, there are a few that slip through the cracks, but the number is small. We're not that far behind the rest of the country. Like, it is a very young industry. We've got a few kind of really promising early stage businesses. We've got a great cohort of students. I think in the in the National Missing Persons Hackathon during Cyber Week. Last year we had 1 team. This year we had 3 teams, and one of the teams was 14th overall and had the most leads. So, you know, you can see that while it is that very early stage, there's some really promising and really significant growth that is happening there, lots of interest that's happening. And I think that, you know, if you flip that on its head, Tasmania and the Northern Territory are the places in the country with absolutely the most potential.
Absolutely, and I think that's true. You know, we've seen that this is what's happened with the AustCyber effect happening across the country once you do, you know, with the exception of Victoria, because there's already been a huge amount done in Victoria, you know, that, you know, where we see that sort of landing of AustCyber as the 2 guys here from Queensland have been able to demonstrate that the sort of exponential curve really starts to rise. So, and the fact that you're building those foundations in Tasmania to really take advantage of that rapid growth so that it happens in a quality way, to Linda's point, I think is fantastic. So frankly, game on for the rest of you, because Tasmania and Northern Territory are going to get their game on very soon.
We're going to steal all the secrets. Everything that you've worked out, we're just going to take it wholesale.
Which is great, because that's, of course, how we should be sharing the knowledge. And AustCyber is working with the Northern Territory government to be able to establish a node in the Northern Territory. I do get asked frequently, is there actually any cyber activity happening in the Northern Territory? Well, that's actually a sort of a bit of a loaded question. Of course, there's just as much cyber activity happening in the Northern Territory as there is anywhere else in the country. It is a horizontal. So of course there's cyber activity going on. There are actually cyber companies that are headquartered out of the Northern Territory, and the Northern Territory government has now turned their attention to being able to make sure that that is leveraged for all of the reasons that we've been talking about today. So we look forward to an announcement on that in hopefully the first half of 2021. And also, of course, we are in very advanced stages to finalise the node in Victoria, which is just fantastic. We have still been doing a lot of work in Victoria without the node being there, but of course a node really does make the difference, as you've seen today. And so I think that the next question really has to be about this opportunity space around being able to take that startup ethos and being able to scale nationally recognised companies. There's actually, as Paula said, you know, these nationally recognised companies are in every jurisdiction. And, you know, we'll make sure that we've got that visibility next time around for Tasmania and to the Northern Territory. But there are brands that are becoming business household names. How do you say that? You know, names that are known within businesses across the country, which is just fantastic. And this is where we're going to do a little segue into the Lens benchmark report, though. So again, encourage you to download that report and have a really good read of it. And of course, if James Turner was with us today, he'd be saying that one of the surprising elements of that report is that spending has actually increased. Now, when we think about that, why is that surprising? When we look at the ASX top 100, you could go even to the 200, but across the mid-tiers as well of the economy, you know, there was a fair bit of cutting back that happened before the end of financial year. And we had a whole series of cyber companies lose contracts as a result of that. But we all understand the reasons why that happened. But then you flick over into how we came out of lockdown, which actually just totally coincidentally happened to coincide with the Australian end of financial year, flipping into a new financial year. And we've seen this landscape change, haven't we? The propulsion forward has been incredible, and the benchmark really looks at that in depth. And so looking at the buyer behaviour and seeing the opportunity now that we have to really take this sort of, you know, the big brands that we've seen started to emerge out of our cyber industry, Casada, Secure Code Warrior, Prophecy with their Snare product, CyberCX has obviously just exploded onto the scene over the past 12 months. It's been a little bit longer than 12 months now. So I'm going to ask each of you, get ready. As you know, Paula, you've already sort of named one, but I'm going to ask you a slightly different question when we come back to you. You know, if we think about some of these companies that are just, you know, in that portfolio now of AustCyber's portfolio now being over 350 companies, you know, gosh, there are some big names in there. And the ACT doesn't get to declare Pen 10 because we all do know Pen 10. If we think about some of those up and coming scaling companies. So at AustCyber Central, we're focused very, very heavily on the scaling companies as all of our nodes look after the startup side, the pipeline side of things. I'm going to ask each of you to kind of talk a little bit about some of the brands that we're starting to see come through. So I'm going to start with you, Ian. Out of WA, we've got some companies that have been acquired by CyberCX, but there's this emergent number of companies that we've seen there, and of course there's one that's got a colour in their name that we love dearly. Talk to us a bit about what's going on.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I guess just to plug WA a little bit harder, because I'm starting to be outdone by others. The fact that we can fit 32 Great Britons into Western Australia, and the fact that it's the largest state in the Southern Hemisphere, and the fact that there are 9 massive regions, and the GVAP is incredible, and basically the GDP kind of component push from iron ore, you know, makes us all wear clothes during the day, because otherwise the lights would be turned off in the east. And not to mention GST receipts. But
goodness.
really...
Politician in the making.
Red Piranha, again, Simon and I deal with these guys daily. And obviously Adam Bennett is passionate, but to your point, absolutely, because of the operational technology environment embedded, I guess, within DigiAg, and obviously critical infrastructure at ports and mining oil and gas, and even rare earths. Red Piranha, you know, if they didn't scale and double and triple by 2022, I think Adam wouldn't be happy. So you're right, in terms of headcount, in terms of kind of productization and that unified threat management platform that he's been crystallized, that he's been flogging like a dead horse everywhere, fantastic. So in terms of, again, eyeballs, but also reach into nearshore, and obviously the Pilbara, you know, the Karratha Port, Dampier Port system with Port Hedland. Again, Australia kind of turns off if the iron ore isn't shipped and the ports don't run. So they backhaul, obviously, the SOC layer to Perth, but also they have eyes and ears in the Pilbara. The other thing is that for us, that is probably not well understood by many of us, is that local government around Australia owns a lot of critical infrastructure. And as I think Casey or somebody was saying, the distressed asset, or the kind of dormant assets, whether it's the 37 airports that are under jurisdiction of local government in Western Australia, again, in the supply, when they're kind of corrupted or they just turn off, back to you know, gross state product for all of us, that's where the Australian economy stops. So if AustCyber, in the middle of that, understands our mission, which we clearly do, to open the eyes of the people who probably need their eyes opened and pried open, then if it's an operational technology layer, with Red Piranha, but also with Sapien Cyber. A good example is, again, Sapien, and they're going to actually be on our floor. So they're moving in, they're kitting out our little hub at the moment. Again, Glenn Murray says very clearly, with about 40 headcount, he could swell to 80, 120 easily. So it's almost the kind of the CUA, so the kind of the procurement chewing gum that you identified years ago. Actually, when we first started, a couple of years ago, you said, if I can unplug that procurement flow to different, you know, ABNs, Australian Cybers, then even at the local government layer, but also that critical infrastructure, port infrastructure, freight logistics, whatever it is, that layer, then our cybers win, especially in the OT space in Western Australia. So we've done some stuff with farmers in kind of the Great Southern in WA at the moment. They're at harvest. So again, they've got hundreds of millions of dollars of capital invested in their machinery, plus their IoT, plus their kind of wireframes and around their farms, etc. Plus the backhaul to the suppliers, because they forward sold canola and barley and wheat and everything to the world. If that doesn't get out securely to port and out from West Australian kind of critical infrastructure, it's really lights out. So you're right in the fact that the enabling infrastructure for, especially in OT in Western Australia, Simon and I, we deal with them kind of daily these days, because they're pressing us on the procurement angle, they're pressing us to kind of to open the eyes of critical infrastructure providers, especially in state government. But equally, the supply chain, if that, again, in your words, kind of echoed in my mind from last year, if that's kind of stopped and it's glued up, then that kind of, well, the job maker, job saver, job keeper, it's really lights out. So that's what we're cognizant of every day. But also a shout out to people like Jason Pang with Retrospect Labs, and kind of that kind of went and gone through CyRise and other things, but just the way that they're embedding themselves, grabbing TAFE and ECU and Curtin University and the ecosystem of graduates, not just Edith Cowan. They're looking for talent. So again, they're scouring the local landscape. But equally, you know, Sidearm came in and they embedded their kind of simulation platform into North Metro TAFE system, as did Red Piranha. So again, while we look like we want to, you know, get into a UFC match with each other, it's just wonderful when we can talk to each other through Zoom's a bit, but really face to face, we can text and message and just say, did you know his introduction, Daltrey's. There's so many people that want to see. I'm going to sing a song now.
Well,
in
that's
Japanese.
a good segue to pass across to Mina because, of course, yes, Daltrey.
Thank you. Yes, and jeez, just. Are you sure you don't want to talk on my behalf as well? Oh. Can we not give him the mic again? Thank you for bringing Daltrey up because, of course, Daltrey is a fantastic, company based in New South Wales. And, of course, you mentioned all the other great companies that were based in New South Wales. And it's not about the quantity.
Oh, here we go.
It's also about the fact that we have the creme de la creme of companies based in New South Wales.
For everyone to step up and follow.
Exactly right. And you know what? I'm absolutely open to them having a footprint right across the country and having offices all over in the ACT, even in Western Australia, although it's on the other side of the world. We encourage that. We through the growth network of nodes, we encourage that. But coming back to Daltrey announced just yesterday something really exciting with their identity software going global, their first global client, which is extremely exciting. So they're a great company to watch and just watch them rise. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about, which was surprising for me from the SCP, was the fact that unfortunately, in New South Wales, we are behind when it comes to exports. We're sitting at 38. The national average is 43. So 38% is not that far off, but I had hoped that that number would be much higher. With that said, with all the investment that the New South Wales government is doing into the sector, I can only imagine that that number will go up. And of course, we're going to support them because one of the things that the Cybers did mention was that it was very difficult for them to gain access into that export industry. So from a national central perspective, AustCyber Central is going to, I believe, with my discussions with P, we're working on some things that will help all of us, especially New South Wales, in gaining access to export markets. So that's very exciting. I'm really looking forward to doing that. But I'm not going to talk too much because, the results speak for themselves. All I need to say is Casada. All I need to say is Huntsman. And
The list goes on.
so many others.
The list goes on. Well, colleagues, we're almost at time, so I'm going to then speed things up and pass the mic along. And so between Mark and Lou, Queensland, give us some of those brands. Where are we? Who are we going to be focusing on? Of course, the investors are about to take the pen out.
Look, we've got, I think I was given a spreadsheet when I started with about 30 names. I've probably already met with about 20 extras. So there's a lot out there and they're really keen to connect with us. I would say Asset Note, Secure Stack. We've done a big piece of work with Cybermetrics and we're using them in that education of the small to medium business space and using their cyberturity. But we also have some fantastic MSPs like Batum who do amazing things in diversity, Riot, that we're really partnering close with around that digital apprenticeship. But there's such a passion and there's so many exciting ones. There's a couple of good ones up your way too.
Yeah, well, we've fostered companies like ID Care, which are absolutely vital in recovering identities. We've got Point Duty, which are very much on a global market, Crypto Photo again, and companies like that get born in Queensland often end up overseas. And we've got to try and bring them back in and keep them in Australia.
We do have the highest export percentage,
Absolutely.
60%. Just putting that out there.
That's right. You've also got the the fabulous Right Crowds, just such a special company, so we'll keep going, because I could just keep talking about all these amazing companies. Casey.
Yes.
Give us some names in Tasmania, We know there's only a few of them, so you
Yes.
can probably reel them off right now.
Very quickly. So look, the most exciting, I guess, the beacon for cybersecurity innovation in Tasmania is Fortify Edge, and that's not a new name to anyone in the room. It's not a new name to anyone that's watching. Any of the investors that you mentioned, they're not going to be writing that down because they're going to go, yeah, tick, we already know about Fortify Edge. So they're doing some fantastic work in edge security for IoT systems, which that fits Tasmania so well. We've got some great startups working in the IoT space, particularly in agriculture, and working alongside a cybersecurity startup that's actually making sure those systems are secure. Means that cyber as an enabler for all of these other kind of broad startup founders is just going to be so great for Tassie. In addition to that, we've got the consulting type firms. We've got AQ Advisory 1.0. They're doing some great stuff in the product space. So there's lots of stuff that's coming up. But definitely Fortify Edge. That's the beacon.
That's the beacon, goodness. And as acting node manager for Victoria, of course, there are a huge number of companies down there. We've already had a mention of Sidearm, which has been great. We've got Forticode down there. It's cyber aware. There's so many. And so I'm not going to actually pass to you, Linda, or to Paula, because we've already had some names mentioned out of those jurisdictions. Because what I want to do with the last couple of minutes is talk about something that is super exciting. Of course, one of the things that the cybersecurity industry has come to expect of AustCyber is to keep on ratcheting it up. So we've got two really big things that are coming up. Last night, if you were part of the industry launch of the SCP, the webinar that we did there, you had a little bit of a hint of one of the big things that's coming up. But something that's a little bit closer, just before Christmas, of course, is AU Cyberscape, which we announced during Cyber Week. And so for all of those companies that are cybersecurity companies, dialed into this webinar thinking they didn't mention us, because there's so many of you, there's now over 350 of you, we could not possibly name all of you as much as I would love to. But AU Cyberscape is all about being able to showcase every single company all the time to the world and being able to place some real user-based experiences behind that. So a digital ecosystem, a true digital ecosystem, is one that gives the user an individual experience of when you go into the platform and you rummage around all of the different things that are available within it. Gosh, isn't this going to be an amazing tool and resource, not just for buyers and investors of any size across the economy, but to really bolster that export opportunity and be able to be a tool for within our own industry, for partnerships, for JVs, all of that kind of thing. So I know that that's on your Christmas list for everyone to have AU Cyberscape up and running, which will be really exciting. And the really big thing that's coming down the barrel for AustCyber, I can't say anything more about, but gosh, it's going to be big, bigger than anyone could have ever imagined. It's just so exciting. So blank check time. We did this last night with our panel last night, so I'm going to do it again. I'll go first so that you've got a little bit of time to think about it, but we're going to run through it super fast so we can stick to time for everyone. So the blank check is not about money. What is the one thing that when we come back together again in 12 months' time to launch the 2021 update to the SCP that you wished will have happened? So from a node perspective, you get 2 bites of the cherry, Linda. You get ACT and national. Boo. I'm going to speak for the Northern Territory and Victoria, and I'm going to say first that we have nodes in both locations open. Huzzah! Yay! So I think we can get that done. So let's take that challenge on. Tick. And so get ready, Paula. I'm going to come to you in a moment, but we'll go to Mina first. What's the one thing?
Regional representation.
Oh, that's fantastic. I like that.
Yeah.
We have been talking to Minister Dominello about how we go and use Bathurst as the kind of visionary there and then take that out across the regions into New South Wales. Wonderful. Paula, coming to you next.
Thanks, Michelle. I would really love to see our skills and educational targets and goals really come to fruition. I think for all of our states and territories, all of our nodes, that's absolutely foundational for us to be able to deliver on all of our other goals and objectives. So absolutely need to nail the skills thing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paula. Ian?
Local content, so buying locally, so definitely buying Cyber Australia.
Excellent. Love it. Paula, Lou.
I would say exactly the same. That's something that's really passionate for our cybers in Queensland, buying local, buying our own stuff.
And being sovereign. Absolutely. Mark?
Education of our 30,000 SMEs in cybersecurity, generating $5 million in economic value.
Oh, that's wonderful. Casey.
We're going to overtake South Australia.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a game on. More than 9 companies by the end of next year. Let's make that 90. ACT.
From ACT perspective, seeing our export go from 29% to 45% in partnership with the Canberra Business Chamber.
Fantastic. I love that. And national. What are we doing nationally, Linda?
Nationally, you took my first thought was Victoria and Northern Territory before the end of this financial year.
Oh, she
hopefully.
stepped it up. Okay, yep.
But no, sovereignty across all of our state governments in regards to cloud hosting, in regards to products and services.
Love it. Colleagues, we have come to the end of our time. We always can talk more and more at AustCyber. This has been such an enriching conversation. I hope you have found it to be that way as well. You have now met in person the majority of our node managers, and there's more to come. This is such an exciting time to be a part of the Australian cybersecurity industry. What is not to love? Make sure you reach out to the node managers. All of their details are on our website. And absolutely, with all of those challenges that we've just thrown out, it is game on. Thanks for joining us for a wonderful discussion.